The worst moment of my life happened on a Tuesday, which somehow made it worse. Tuesdays are supposed to be boring. Tuesdays are supposed to be the day you eat leftover pasta and forget to take out the recycling. They are not supposed to be the day you walk across a candlelit room and kiss the wrong man in front of 40 witnesses. But I'm getting ahead of myself. His name was Owen Harcourt. And before everything fell apart, I thought I was going to marry him. We'd been together for almost 2 years when he told me his family wanted to meet me. Properly, he said, like there was some informal version I'd already passed. We'd done the casual stuff. His sister's birthday drinks at a bar in Gastown, a Christmas brunch where his mother hugged me and said she'd heard so much about me. But this was different. This was the official dinner at his parents' house in West Vancouver. The kind of dinner where the good china comes out and someone makes a roast, and you know, without anyone saying it, that you're being evaluated. "You're nervous," Owen said, watching me change outfits for the 3rd time. "I'm not nervous. You've tried on 4 blouses. I'm cold." I wasn't cold. It was July. He laughed and pulled me into a hug from behind, and I looked at us in the mirror. Me tense and flushed, him easy and calm the way he always was. And I thought, this is the person I'm going to spend my life with. I actually thought that. I remember it clearly. The drive to West Vancouver took 40 minutes. Owen talked the whole way, filling me in on the family dynamics the way you'd brief someone before a job interview. His parents, Robert and Caroline, formal but warm once you got past the first half hour. His sister Ellie, who I already liked. His aunt and uncle visiting from Calgary, and then, almost like an afterthought, right as we were pulling off the upper levels highway. "Oh, and my brother will be there." I turned to look at him. "You have a brother?" "Half-brother." "Declan." He said the name flatly. "We're not close. How is this the first time I'm hearing about him?" Owen's jaw did something I'd seen it do before, a small tightening, barely visible. "It's complicated. He and my dad have a history. Declan mostly keeps to himself. I didn't think he'd come. I waited for more. It didn't come." "Okay," I said finally. "What's he like?" Owen was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Different, and that was all I got. I should have asked more questions. I know that now." But we were already pulling into the driveway, and Caroline was waving from the front steps, and Owen was getting out of the car with that easy smile of his. And I tucked the information away, somewhere in the back of my mind, and decided to figure it out when I got there. The house was beautiful in that specific West Vancouver way, all timber and glass, perched on a hillside with the inlet glittering below. Inside, it smelled like roasting garlic and something floral I couldn't identify. Robert shook my hand with both of his and called me by my name, Sasha, and I felt myself relax slightly. Caroline handed me a glass of Prosecco and asked about my work. "I'm a project coordinator at a mid-sized architecture firm downtown," and we talked for 20 minutes straight, and I thought, okay, this is okay. I can do this. The brother arrived late. I heard him before I saw him. A brief exchange near the front door, low voices, a pause that had a particular quality to it, the kind of pause that happens when 2 people are performing civility. Then Robert said, come in," and the conversation in the living room continued, and I went back to my Prosecco. Ellie leaned over to me. "He's here," she said, with a look I couldn't decode. Not warning exactly. More like bracing. When I turned around, Declan Harcourt was standing in the entrance to the living room, talking to his father in a low voice. He was taller than Owen, broader through the shoulders, with dark hair, and the kind of face that seemed entirely comfortable being looked at. He was wearing a jacket that probably cost more than my rent, and he wasn't wearing it the way people wear expensive things when they're trying to impress you. He was wearing it the way people wear things they simply own. He glanced across the room, and our eyes met for maybe 2 seconds. I looked away first. Dinner was at a long table on the back terrace overlooking the water. It was one of those perfect July evenings that makes you forget Vancouver winters exist. Warm, clear, the mountains still pink-edged with the last of the sunset. Owen sat beside me. Declan sat at the opposite end of the table, next to Robert, and I was glad for the distance. I say glad, but that's not quite right. It was more that I was aware of the distance, which is not the same thing. The conversation moved the way family conversations move, around, looping back, full of references I half understood and inside jokes I smiled at politely. I asked Caroline about the garden. I talked to Owen's uncle about the flames, Even though I don't follow hockey very closely, I was doing everything right. I was absolutely killing it. And then Declan said something that made the whole table laugh. I don't even remember what it was, something dry about interest rates, of all things. And I laughed too, without meaning to, and when I looked up, he was looking at me with a half smile that I felt somewhere in my chest. I looked back at my food. You okay? Owen said quietly. Yeah, I said. Great. After dinner, people drifted. Caroline brought out dessert. Robert opened a bottle of something he'd apparently been saving. The table split into smaller conversations, and I stood up to find the washroom, and when I came back out into the hallway, Declan was standing just outside the terrace door, alone, looking at his phone. He looked up. You're Sasha, he said. That tends to be how it works. Yes. Something shifted in his expression. Declan, I know. He put his phone away. How long have you been with my brother? Almost 2 years. He told you about me. He told me about you tonight, in the car. Declan made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Yeah, that sounds right. I should have gone back to the terrace. I knew I should. But there was something about the way he said it. Not bitter, not performatively wounded, just matter of fact, like he'd long since stopped expecting anything different. That kept me standing there. What happened between you two? I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. You sure you want that answer? No, I said honestly. But I'm asking anyway. He told me. Not all of it. I got the impression there were layers to the Harcourt family history that would take years to fully understand. But enough. Enough to understand that Declan and Owen's father had had an affair. That Declan was the result. That he'd grown up on the periphery of this family and been allowed into it only halfway and on particular terms. And that Owen had never quite forgiven their father for the disruption, which had translated, over time, into a particular kind of coldness toward his half-brother. I'm not asking for sympathy, Declan said. I just get tired of pretending the dynamic doesn't exist. I wasn't going to offer sympathy, I said. I was going to say it sounds incredibly isolating. He went quiet, just for a second. Then yeah, it does. We stood there in the hallway for too long. I know that now. At the time it felt like 5 minutes. I think it was closer to 20. We talked about other things. Where I was from, originally, Edmonton, which made him smile for some reason, my job, his work in real estate development, the way Vancouver had changed in the last decade. We talked like two people who had just found themselves in the same strange pocket of an evening, and didn't quite want to leave it yet. When I finally went back to the terrace, Owen was laughing at something Ellie had said, and he looked up and smiled at me, and I smiled back, and I told myself the thing I'd been feeling in the hallway was just the Prosecco and the night air. I believed it, mostly. We drove home along the highway with the city lights below us, and Owen said, "You did great," and squeezed my hand, and I said thank you, and we didn't talk about Declan at all. The engagement party was 3 months later. Owen proposed on a Saturday morning in our apartment, just the two of us, with coffee going and rain on the windows. And it was exactly the kind of proposal I would have described if someone had asked me to imagine one. Simple and real. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and put a ring down between our mugs and said, "I know this isn't very dramatic, but I figured you wouldn't want dramatic." He was right. I didn't want dramatic. I said yes without hesitation. We set the engagement party for October. His parents offered to host it. A proper dinner, they said, 40-odd people, the house done up nicely. I spent weeks on the details. I bought a dress the color of dark amber that I loved the moment I put it on. I made a playlist. I drafted and redrafted a short speech about Owen that was honest and warm without being cloying. Declan was not on the guest list. Owen told me this without much ceremony, just noted it in passing when we were going over RSVPs. "I didn't invite Declan," he said. "Things are weird between us right now. I didn't push it. Maybe I should have." The party arrived. The house was transformed. Fairy lights, flowers, the terrace heated against the October chill. 42 people who loved Owen, and some who were learning to love me. I moved through the rooms, feeling like the evening was exactly what it should be. At 8 o'clock, I slipped inside to touch up my lipstick. The main floor was mostly empty, everyone having migrated to the terrace. I came out of the powder room, and the hallway was dim, the lighting all warm and low. He was standing at the bottom of the stairs. My first thought, I need you to understand this, was that it was Owen. Genuinely, the light was amber, The angle was wrong. I'd had 2 glasses of wine. They have the same build from that distance, same dark hair, and Owen had mentioned he'd stepped inside to get a jacket. So I walked across the hallway without a second thought, and I put my hands on his shoulders and I kissed him. It took less than a second for everything to go wrong. He kissed back. Just barely. Just for that fraction of a breath. And then his hands came up and held my arms, not pulling me closer, and I felt it. Something off. Not Owen's aftershave, not Owen's hands, and I stepped back and looked up and the world tilted. Declan was looking at me with an expression I still can't fully describe. Not smug, not predatory, something more complicated than that, like a man who has just had something confirmed that he'd been trying very hard not to think about. "Wrong one," he said quietly. Not cruel, just quiet. I stepped back so fast I nearly hit the wall. "What are you?" I couldn't finish the sentence. "You weren't. Owen called me this afternoon. His voice was completely even. Asked me to come. Said he wanted to try again." He paused. "I should have told you who I was the second you came out of that room. Why didn't you?" He didn't answer right away. When he did, he said, "I don't know." I didn't believe him. I'm not sure he believed himself. I went back to the terrace. Owen was there, laughing with his uncle, and I stood next to him, and he put his arm around me and the party continued, and I spent the rest of the evening being exactly who I was supposed to be, smiling, laughing, giving my speech, which landed exactly the way I'd hoped it would. Declan had gone. I didn't see him leave, but I thought about what he'd said. I thought about it the whole drive home, while Owen talked about the party, about the food, about his mother's speech which had made Ellie cry. I sat in the passenger seat, and I nodded and said the right things, and tried to figure out what was wrong with me. Because the thing I hadn't been able to say out loud, the thing I was only barely able to acknowledge to myself, was this. For those 2 or 3 seconds in the hallway, before I realized my mistake, I had not been sorry. That was the part that scared me. I tried to put it away. I was good at that. I'd been doing it since July. I threw myself into the engagement planning, into work, into the easy rhythms of life with Owen, who was kind and consistent, and exactly who he had always been. We looked at venues. We talked about a late spring wedding. His mother took me to Granville Island, and we spent an afternoon looking at stationery, and it was nice. It was genuinely nice. But Declan had said something to me, at that dinner in July, that kept surfacing when I wasn't prepared for it. He'd said, "I just get tired of pretending the dynamic doesn't exist." And I kept thinking about it in contexts he hadn't meant. We ran into each other in November, completely by accident. I was at a coffee place on Hastings, waiting for a friend who was running late, and Declan walked in with a folder under his arm and stopped when he saw me. We both did that thing where you calculate whether it's possible to pretend you haven't seen each other, and then both acknowledged it was too late. He sat down across from me, not asking, exactly, but the chair scraped back and he was there, and I didn't tell him not to be. "How's the engagement going?" he asked. "Good, fine, great, that's 3 adjectives. I'm a thorough person." He smiled. He had a specific kind of smile. It came slowly, like he was making sure he meant it before he committed to it. "I'm sorry," he said, "about the party. I should have told you immediately." "You should have," I agreed. "Are you going to tell Owen?" I had asked myself that question approximately 400 times. "No," I said. "Why not?" "Because nothing happened." He looked at me steadily. "Okay." "Something almost happened," I said, and then immediately regretted it. He didn't jump on it. He just sat with it for a moment, and then said, "Yeah, we talked for an hour. My friend texted to cancel, and I should have left, but I didn't. I found out things about him I hadn't known. That he'd grown up partly in Toronto with his mother. That he'd come to Vancouver at 22 for school and never left. That he had a dog named Rupert who he described with the same measured economy he applied to everything else. And that underneath all of that quiet containment there was something that felt, to me, like the most honest person I'd been in a room with in a very long time. I left before anything could happen. I want to be clear about that. I left and I went home and Owen was making dinner and he looked up and said hi, and I kissed him on the cheek and asked how his day had been, but something had shifted. I felt it like a change in pressure, barely perceptible but real. December came. The holidays brought Owen's whole family to the West Vancouver house for Christmas Eve. His parents, Ellie and her boyfriend, the aunt and uncle again, and this time, Declan. Owen had told me quietly, that they were trying, that he'd decided at some point in November to stop punishing his brother for something that wasn't his brother's fault. I thought about the timing of that decision. November. I didn't let myself think about it for too long. Christmas Eve dinner was warm and bright, and I sat across from Declan, and we made eye contact twice the entire evening. Once when someone said something funny, and we both caught it at the same moment. Once at the end of the night, near the door, when I was putting on my coat. He looked at me and I looked at him, and neither of us said anything, and Owen's hand found the small of my back, and I turned away. The new year came. Owen and I had a fight in January, our first real one. Not the surface arguments about dishes or plans, but something that went deeper. He had forgotten something important to me. A work presentation I'd been building toward for months. And when I brought it up, he got defensive in the specific way he sometimes did, building a case for why his forgetting was understandable, constructing an argument around my disappointment. It wasn't a deal-breaker fight. Couples have that fight. But afterwards, lying awake with Owen asleep beside me, I realized I couldn't remember the last time he'd simply said, "I'm sorry," without the architecture around it. I thought about Declan in the coffee shop. "I'm sorry." About the party. Just that. I hated myself for the comparison. February. I called my sister in Edmonton, who knows me better than anyone, and without telling her any of the specifics I said, "Do you ever worry you're making a decision that looks right from the outside but feels off in some way you can't explain?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Sasha, what are you not telling me?" "Nothing," I said. Hypothetically, she repeated, and I could hear her making the face she makes. Hypothetically, I think sometimes we build a life that fits on paper because we're scared of what it means if we admit the fit isn't quite right. I sat with that for a week. In March, Owen and I were having dinner with his parents when Caroline mentioned, with great casualness, that Declan had been offered a development project in Halifax and was considering the move. I put my fork down, quietly, like nothing had happened. Owen said good for him, in a neutral voice, and I thought, so this is when it would end. Whatever undefined, unspoken thing this was, it would end by geography, and I could move forward and everything would be fine. I went to find him. I want to be honest about that. I'm not going to dress it up. I texted him that night. I had his number from when Owen had shared family contact info, and I said, simply, "I heard you might be moving." He replied 10 minutes later, thinking about it. I wrote back, "Can we talk?" We met at a place in Kitsilano, neutral ground, a Tuesday afternoon in March, with the cherry blossoms just coming in outside. He was there when I arrived, same unhurried way of occupying space, and I sat across from him and looked at him and understood that I had run out of room to keep pretending. "I need to ask you something," I said. "Okay, that night at the party. You said you didn't know why you didn't tell me immediately." "Yeah, was that true?" He looked at me for a long time. "No," he said finally, "it wasn't." The cherry blossoms were very pink outside. Someone at a nearby table was talking about a flight delay. My coffee was going cold. "I need you to say it plainly," I told him, "because I've been trying to talk myself out of it for 8 months, and I'm tired, and I need to hear it said plainly, so I can decide what to do with it." He leaned forward, both forearms on the table. "I didn't tell you because for about 5 seconds I let myself have something I'd been trying not to want since July." He held my gaze. "That's as plain as I can make it." I drove home. I sat in the parking garage under our building for 22 minutes. I called my sister and said, "I need to talk to you," and she said, "I know," even though I hadn't told her anything. I told Owen that evening, not about Declan, about myself, about the thing I'd been aware of and hadn't said, the fit that wasn't quite right, the feeling I'd been carrying around since the summer, and calling by other names. I told him as clearly as I could, as kindly as I knew how, that I loved him, and I did, genuinely, but that I didn't think I was being honest with him, or with myself by continuing. He didn't take it well. That would be too much to ask. There was anger, and then a terrible quietness that was worse than the anger. And then he said something that I think about still. "Is this about Declan?" I said, "It's about me," which was true. It was also not the whole truth. I don't know if that distinction matters. I moved into a sublet in Mount Pleasant. I called my sister every day for 2 weeks. I went to work and came home and sat in a quiet apartment that smelled like someone else's life and let myself feel the full weight of what I'd done. Declan did not call me. Not for 6 weeks. I respected that. When he did, it was a Saturday morning, and he said, "Can I see you?" I said, "Yes." We met at the seawall and walked for a long time without saying very much. The mountains were out. Someone was flying a kite. At some point he said, "This is probably going to be complicated," and I said, "I know," and he said, "I just want you to go in with your eyes open," and I stopped walking and turned to look at him. "Declan," I said. "I blew up my engagement. My eyes are extremely open." He made that slow, careful smile. "Fair enough," he said, and then, quietly, "Hey, Sash." It was the first time he'd used a nickname. I know it sounds like a small thing. It wasn't. I didn't choose Declan because he was dangerous or exciting, or because I was chasing some kind of thrill. I want to be clear about that. I chose honesty. I chose the thing that had been quietly persistent through 8 months of my trying to talk it down. The thing that had survived every reasonable argument I made against it. Owen deserved someone who wasn't doing that, who wasn't making arguments, in the back of their mind, against their own feelings. He deserved better than a version of me that was only half present, and I think part of me knew that long before I was willing to say it. Does it feel good, what I did? No, not most days. I think about Owen's face in that quiet moment after the anger, and I don't think I'll ever completely get over that. I think about his mother and the way she'd taken me to Granville Island, and how I'll probably never see her again, and that hurts in a specific, dull way. But here is what I know. I spent 8 months building a scaffolding of small reassurances around a feeling I refused to examine, and all that scaffolding was doing was making it easier for me not to look at it directly. And eventually, things that don't get looked at directly will find a way to make you look. Mine did it in a hallway on a Tuesday night in October, with bad lighting and too much going on, and a moment of mistaken identity that wasn't entirely innocent on either side. The wrong door sometimes opens the right room. I don't know if Declan and I will last. I don't know if this thing between us, real and careful and still so new, will survive the weight of how it started, or the family it's tangled up in, or the perfectly ordinary difficulties of 2 people trying to make something honest out of complicated circumstances. What I know is this: I'm not pretending anymore, and Declan, for all his careful quietness, has never once asked me to. He calls me Sash. I still can't tell you why that matters so much, but it does.